Good morning. You're watching All You Need to Know on BloombergQuint Live, and I'm Alex Matthew. First, the headlines. Over 1,000 people have now died from the novel coronavirus. The total number of cases across the world has topped 42,000. Counting of votes for the 70 seats in the Delhi Assembly elections will begin shortly. Exit polls have predicted another term for Arvind Kejriwal's Aam Aadmi Party. Jaguar Land Rover has warned of supply chain disruptions outside of China in the wake of the coronavirus. The luxury car maker had earlier warned of the virus impacting its fourth quarter earnings. Oil prices fall to their lowest in more than a year as prospects of an OPEC meeting this month to discuss output curbs fade. And low demand coupled with weak realizations are likely to result in a subdued quarter for Coal India. The company is likely to report its numbers post-market hours today. Let's talk about the U.S. markets now. They began the new trading week on a strong note, with benchmark indices advancing despite fears arising from the spread of the coronavirus. The S&P 500 and the Dow gained over 0.5%, while the Nasdaq rose about 1.1%. Pranita Young of Bloomberg News tells you why investors were in a risk-on mode on Monday.
U.S. stocks closed Monday's session higher, and investors seem to shrug off some of the worries from the deadly coronavirus, which originated in China. Investors are also awaiting more corporate earnings results. During the session, we saw FedEx rising after UBS raised the company's price target to $187 a share from $161. WWE is falling after Wells Fargo cut its stock rating, and we know that this week we'll have more earnings. That includes Hasbro Interactive, DaVita Dialysis, and Hilton. Meanwhile, Fed Chair Jay Powell is set to speak on Tuesday and Wednesday to Congress, giving more views on monetary policy. Gold was higher during the session, which showed that there still was some nervousness about the coronavirus in markets. That's a look at your Wall Street action on Monday. In New York, I'm Pranita Young for Bloomberg News.
Now, the death toll from the coronavirus has crossed the 1,000 mark, with the new report projecting the mortality rate at 1%. Selina Wang and Yvonne Man of Bloomberg News get you the latest ground report from Beijing and Hong Kong.
Most of the blame we've seen as thus far has been placed on those local officials for being slow to recognize the extent of this outbreak. And all of that was exacerbated last week after the death of a doctor who had sounded early warnings about the virus and was reprimanded by local authorities for rumor mongering. That really crystallized people's frustrations, especially at the local government, for not taking this seriously enough from the outset. So it really is no surprise that we have seen some measures taken on those local officials. As you heard there from the World Health Organization China representative, we are starting to see a narrow, brief window of optimism as those case numbers start to stabilize. But he did add that it's too early to conclude at this point if containment has worked. It's too early to say if the very stringent, unprecedented lockdown measures that have been placed in Hubei province have worked. The death toll, meanwhile, does continue to climb, surpassing 1,000 with more than 42,000 cases now, though research is expecting, some new research expecting that to potentially fall the mortality rate to 1%.
Yeah, and Selena, further to that, in terms of that accountability side of the story, we are seeing the President Xi Jinping going to that hospital in Chaoyang district, and we're just hearing, crossing the Bloomberg, according to the state-run CGTN news network, that the Hubei province has removed its health commission head as well as the party chief. Those two individuals removed them from their posts. Let me get to you, Yvonne, in Hong Kong, where we are seeing more cases outside of mainland China as well. We know Japan has been affected, but Hong Kong seeing some new developments.
Yeah, 6 new cases today, Heidi, and now that brings the total to 42 here in the city. And early this morning, more than 100 residents in a public estate in Qingyi, this is an apartment near the airport, were evacuated as a safety precaution. This is after we learned of 2 people in that building that contracted the disease. The latest was a 62-year-old woman who was tested positive, and she lived directly below a man who also contracted contracted the disease earlier. He was Hong Kong's 12th case here in the city. And authorities are now assessing just how this virus spread in this building. They're not ruling out any possibilities and even considering whether this virus is airborne. Meanwhile, we are also learning developments in another cruise ship, the Holland America's Westerdam. This is another Carnival cruise. Departed from Hong Kong on February 1st. It was supposed to disembark in Yokohama on the 15th, and we are learning after reports of possible coronavirus cases on board, it is now being denied to disembark in multiple ports, the likes of Manila, Guam, and possible multiple ports in Japan. Thailand, the latest to also not allow this vessel to disembark. The company coming out in a statement last night saying that these reports are unfounded. They have not found any cases of the coronavirus on board. So at this point, that liner stuck at sea.
Yeah, so much concern over potential contagion at this rate, right? Yvonne, we're also hearing that some factories are resuming back to business, but the fallout, of course, for the business community continues.
Yeah, it seems like the fallout is just beginning, Heidi. And we are starting to see a handful of manufacturers resume production. Still a lot of questions on just how many workers are coming back and will they be producing at full speed? The likes of Tesla, though, reopening at Shanghai Gigafactory. We have Ford also saying their Chinese plants most reopened yesterday. They're working with their suppliers now, some of which are in Wuhan when it comes to part supply. But Caterpillar as well saying most of their manufacturing plants in the mainland have been back online, but still a lot of concerns about just how much capacity they do have at this point. We're still hearing some automakers like Volkswagen, Honda, Toyota extending their shutdown, so they won't reopen no earlier than February 17th, they say. And Foxconn as well, resuming production of their iPhone site in Zhengzhou. Still unclear just how much capacity they're talking about there as well. But this was just a day ago when Foxconn, as we reported, was telling their employees that they couldn't figure out a date to resume work. So this just goes to show the uncertainties the global tech and manufacturing supply chains are facing right now.
Meanwhile, the World Health Organization's China representative says that they are seeing a drop in the number of fresh cases, but cannot say whether the outbreak is completely contained. Listen to this exclusive chat he had with Bloomberg Television earlier.
Last week, we have seen a few days now in which the numbers have declined. The reported numbers of both confirmed and suspected cases has collectively declined for a few days almost running, with one day exception. So one can, in themselves, these numbers mean nothing until enough time has passed, well beyond the incubation period of the disease. But we're happier to see them go down rather than up. When people are coming back to work, there is, of course, the possibility of some uptick in transmission. How much of that will happen depends on how deeply is the return to work. We are watching this part also carefully. We cannot say, it is not clear yet that there has been a full return to work. There is, for example, a return to major construction projects, but here in Beijing, there is a strong suggestion that companies that can allow their workers to do teleworking, to use the telephone and the internet, this is still being very much encouraged. So one realizes that the control measures have to be a balance between maintaining some essential economic activity and economic development, because that in itself, if it is constrained, can lead itself to important health consequences, reduction in quality of life, even increased deaths. So you have to, there has to be a balance between the economic activity and the containment measures. We are hoping that this balance will be achieved and still allow the decline to happen.
One final question. China is still facing shortages of medical supplies. What's WHO doing to alleviate the problem?
The shortages are very strong, and it is painful. It is less at WHO. WHO is not a supply and logistic. It's more a technical support agency. But there has been an activation of the UN system, and just a few minutes ago, before we had this interview, we were just talking with the rest of the UN system, our colleagues in UNICEF, UNDP, and I know that other agencies are involved in procuring and helping to meet the shortage. But in China, largely the shortage is being met, or at least strongest efforts to meet the shortages is through mobilization of resources in other provinces, as well as the ramping up of production.
All right, let's turn to the global headlines. Sue Keenan is joining now with the first word headlines.
The U.S. has charged 4 members of the Chinese army for the 2017 hack of consumer credit agency Equifax. Attorney General William Barr says the ruling is a reminder to China that the U.S. has the ability to track down hackers and to prosecute them. The breach exposed the personal information of about 150 million Americans. Equifax told us that the charges are a significant step forward for the data industry.
The fact that the attackers were a military arm of a foreign government really raises the stakes and raises the bar for all of us. And as Attorney General Barr pointed out, it's not just Equifax, they've attacked multiple companies.
To the UK now, the government there says it will break away from EU rules governing financial services, but still wants a durable relationship. Chancellor Saeed Javid says the UK may choose to do things the same way as the single market, but there will be differences as the City of London must match international standards. The EU is ramping up its demand ahead of post-Brexit talks, seeking stricter conditions on a range of issues. President Trump, meanwhile, has released his latest budget with a plan that proposes deep cuts to social programs but increases spending elsewhere. This potentially pushes gross federal debt levels above $30 trillion over the next decade. Now, Trump's $4.8 trillion plan increases debt partly because of tax cuts and heavier expenditures on defense. The budget has no binding power as federal spending is determined by Congress. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Sue Keenan. This is Bloomberg.
All right, let's turn now to the trade setup for the day here in India. Darshan Mehta is joining me to tell you all about that and also to tell you what's happening in the futures and options space. Darshan, it wasn't the best start to the week for us here in India, but then in the US it was a pretty strong start, and the cues globally are seeming quite positive this morning.
Yeah, so US was okay, but Asia today has started weak. Yesterday we opened much lower, we were down, but then we recovered through the end of the day. But nevertheless, it was a negative close. Today we are seeing a bit of positive cues that's coming in from the SGX Nifty, which is indicating a gap up of 37 points. So there's still 2 hours to go. That can change, but as of now, global cues are on the positive side. In terms of how did we end up in trade, we were down almost 66 points, 0.5%. In trade yesterday, the mid cap and small cap end of the market saw heavy selling that came in. 1% sell down on the Nifty small cap and 1% again on the mid cap 100. So there was selling that was happening. On the banking front, we are seeing that again there was selling. The Nifty bank was down. The PSU banks, however, was down almost 1%. So there was heavy selling across the board in trade yesterday. Now, in terms of how did we the contribution end up in trade, TCS, Kotak Mahindra Bank, UPL came out with strong set of numbers. Bajaj Finance continues to outperform, and what didn't do well, obviously M&M and Tata Steel reacting to the numbers. So overall, we were down 66 points on the Nifty. Now, how did the F&O market pan out? We clearly saw that on the Nifty yesterday, there was selling. Open interest build up of 1% on the short side. So there was selling that was seen. 12,040 is where the Nifty futures ended. So the premium is now 8 points. It's moved to a premium. The Nifty bank actually saw a bit of long unwinding that came in. Open interest was down 4% on the counter. Now, how are positions being taken? We are at the 12,100 mark in trade. So at 12,000, put writers are extremely aggressive. which means 12,000 will act as a big support for the market. Call writers not so aggressive from levels of 12,000 to higher level. Obviously at much higher levels, 12,500, 12,400, they're writing, but at this point of time, it seems that 12,000 will hold because put writers are much more aggressive. In trade yesterday, let's see what happened. And we can see that yesterday at the 12,100, the call writers became aggressive on the anticipation of the Nifty falling in much lower. So that was the trend that we saw in the F&O side. Now, a couple of other things on the F&O side that we need to highlight. Stock specific again, open interest built up of 16% on Just Dial. The counter was down 6%. Bharat Forge, weak set of numbers, open interest up 13%. That's of fresh selling. Sales of fresh selling, Apollo Tyres and Tata Steel. All these counters saw fresh selling on decent open interest build up. In terms of other stocks that we need to watch out for, wherein there was either short covering or long unwinding, you could see that there was long unwinding. There was no short covering across all these counters. Open interest down anywhere between 7% to 21%.
Thanks so much for that, Darshan. All right, on to some more stocks that you have to watch out for in trade today. Nikki Mirchandani is joining me now to tell you all about the stocks in news. Nikki, what do you have for us?
Sure, I'm going to be addressing a bunch of earnings. Charlotte Hotels first, where the numbers have been fairly decent. The top line has seen 12% uptick out there, and the net profitability of the company too has risen by more than two-folds. Margins, however, they have contracted to 40% as compared to 46%. Jump in revenue is account of hospitality income as well as rental and commercial segment, which notably has registered more than two-fold jump out there. However, there is a rollback of revenue recognition in rentals, along with some lumpy cost items which have impacted the margin performance of the company. Phoenix Mills next, where the company has reported results which are above estimates. Top line 16% growth, operational performance too sees the similar growth. Net profit shoots higher by as much as 30%. It's the lower electricity expenses and the construction cost which has been receding in this quarter, which essentially has aided the operational performance of the company. Nalco, where the results are way below estimates. Revenue, we're looking at a 23% uptick, but then the operational performance that has taken a hit by as much as 93% year-on-year basis. The company has reported a net loss as compared to net profit. It's essentially the volumes along with the purchase of power which has impacted the operational performance for Nalco. Bajaj Consumer Care, where disappointing show on all the counts. Look at the top line growth, it's down actually by 9%. Net profitability too has taken a hit, and the operational performance has come down by 25%. Essentially, it's the higher raw material cost and other expenses which has dented the margins. And last on the list, we're going to be talking about HSIL, where the promoter has gone ahead and acquired more than 1% stake in the counter.
Nikki, stay with us. You also track Coal India, and it's got the earnings today. Weak thermal demand and prolonged monsoon likely to play spoilsport this time around. What are the numbers that are being priced in?
Sure, we expected a weak set of numbers coming through, at least for the December quarter. Top line, we're expecting a 9% downtick there. 22,926 crore is the number that we're working with. EBITDA, that is expected to come down by as much as 26%. Margins are seen contracting to 21% as compared to 28%, and profitability too is expected to take a hit by 5.1%. The weak thermal demand and the extended monsoons are expected to impact dispatches, which in turn are expected to be lower by as much as 8%. It's also the combination of realization, the lower realization, which is driven by the e-auction prices, which is expected to weigh on the earning performance of the company. E-auction prices, for that matter, they've fallen by as much as 10% year-on-year basis. What we'd like to watch out for would be the dividend declaration from the company, the strategy to raise production, and whether or not the company would be able to meet the target this time around set for FY20 onwards to 24.
All right, thanks, Nikki, for that. Let's take you through some of the stories you'll find on the website, BloombergQuint.com. We spoke about this briefly, the automotive disruption in China. Jaguar Land Rover has warned of potential disruption to its supply chains outside of China 2 days after first declaring that the coronavirus is likely to affect its fourth quarter performance. It admitted that there would likely be an impact, but said that it was too early to quantify. China also accounts for a significant portion of JLR's global retail sales. Now, e-commerce giant Amazon has moved the Karnataka High Court seeking a stay on the investigation ordered by the Competition Commission of India against the company for alleged violations of provisions of competition law. In its plea, Amazon has sought quashing and setting aside of the CCI's probe order, and in its petition, Amazon has said that the CCI order had been passed without application of mind and would cause irreparable loss to the goodwill and reputation of the company if any investigation is allowed. That's all you need to know going into trade today, but do stay tuned. There's a lot more to talk about, and you'll find all of that right here on BloombergQuint.